Everyone knows Rosie the Riveter. Even if you've never opened a history book, you've seen her. A woman in a blue work shirt, a red polka dot bandana, her sleeve rolled up, her arm flexed beneath three simple words: "We can do it." A symbol of determination and of the millions of women who helped change the course of World War II. But the woman almost everyone recognizes never actually existed. Rosie wasn't one person. She wasn't the woman on that poster. She wasn't even created by the United States government. How did someone who never existed become one of the most famous women in history? December 7, 1941. The peaceful Sunday morning over Pearl Harbor ended in fire and smoke. Within hours, the United States entered World War II, and the country changed with it. Factories that had built automobiles and refrigerators were transformed almost overnight. Now they would build bombers, warships, engines, everything the Allied forces needed to fight a global war. But the orders called for more equipment than ever, while millions of the men who ran those machines had left to fight. Without builders, there would be no airplanes, no ships, no victory. And history was about to ask millions of women to do something few had ever imagined. For decades, industrial jobs had been considered men's work: welding steel, driving rivets into aluminum wings. Then the war changed everything. Recruitment campaigns swept the country, and newspapers printed photographs of women in factory uniforms instead of dresses. Teachers, secretaries, students, and homemakers stepped forward, most having never touched an industrial tool. Now they welded sections of ships, assembled aircraft engines, and climbed onto unfinished bombers to fasten thousands of rivets by hand. The hours were long, the machinery dangerous. A misplaced rivet or flawed weld could weaken an aircraft carrying lives into combat. They learned quickly, worked in teams, and proved precision mattered more than old assumptions about who belonged on a factory floor. By the end of the war, nearly 6 million women had entered the American workforce, transforming the United States into what historians called the arsenal of democracy. Along the way, those women earned a single, unforgettable name: Rosie the Riveter. The plants never slept. 3 shifts a day, 7 days a week, the lights burning through the night. At Ford's Willow Run plant outside Detroit, a finished bomber rolled off the line every 63 minutes. Women shared rides before dawn, packed lunches in tin pails, and came home with aluminum dust in their hair. Some left children with neighbors or in company nurseries, working the night shift so a husband on days could watch the baby. The work never stopped. Neither did they. As women filled America's factories, the country needed a symbol. It didn't come from a government campaign. It came from a song. In 1942, songwriters Red Evans and John Jacob Loeb introduced a fictional factory worker named Rosie the Riveter, an ordinary woman building military equipment while her sweetheart fought overseas. She represented determination, patriotism, and the belief that everyone had a role to play. The song was an unexpected success. Newspapers borrowed the nickname, and soon the whole country was calling women in defense plants Rosies. But Rosie was never one specific woman. She was all of them. A country can't picture 6 million people, but it can picture one. That was the quiet power of the name. Rosie wasn't a government slogan or a face on a billboard. She sounded like a neighbor, a sister, the girl down the street. When a newspaper wrote about Rosie, families understood. This was their daughter, their wife, doing work no one had ever asked of her. The fiction made the truth visible. One imaginary woman helped a nation see millions of real ones. Today the name summons one image, a poster now among the most recognizable ever made. During World War II, almost nobody saw it. Artist J. Howard Miller created the poster in 1943 for the Westinghouse Electric Company. It wasn't designed to recruit women, and it wasn't printed across America. It hung inside a handful of Westinghouse factories for a short time to encourage employees already at work. Then it disappeared. No national campaign, no magazine covers. When the war ended, it faded quietly into history, and for decades, almost no one remembered it. Then, nearly 40 years after the war, historians rediscovered the forgotten poster. It appeared in museums, history books, and classrooms, then on mugs, T-shirts, advertisements, and eventually the internet. People assumed the woman on the poster had always been Rosie the Riveter. During the war, almost no one connected the image with Rosie at all. Its fame came long after the fighting stopped. If the woman on the famous poster wasn't Rosie, then who was? As Rosie's fame grew, people asked the obvious question: who was she? For decades, historians searched photographs, newspapers, and factory employment records. Several women were named as possible inspirations. Some had worked in aircraft plants. Others appeared in famous wartime photographs. But every claim raised the same problem. If this woman was Rosie, what about the others? There wasn't one Rosie. There never had been. Rosie was every riveter, every welder, every machinist. Every woman who stepped into a factory while someone she loved fought thousands of miles away. When the war ended, the factories changed again. Contracts slowed, production returned to civilian goods, and millions of soldiers came home. Women who had spent years building bombers and warships were encouraged to step aside so returning veterans could reclaim their jobs. The gains were not equality. Many lost industrial positions and old barriers returned. But millions had earned wages, mastered new trades, and seen a wider future for themselves and their daughters. Most went quietly back to ordinary lives, rarely thinking of themselves as heroes. Then, decades later, history remembered. The woman who never existed had become one of the most recognizable women in the world. Yet something had shifted that could not be undone. Some women stayed on, taking whatever work remained, often at lower pay. Others carried the memory home like a tool they weren't allowed to use. Their daughters grew up hearing the stories of paychecks earned, of machines mastered, of a door that had opened and then closed. When those daughters pushed the door open again, a generation later, they were finishing something their mothers had started. History has a curious way of choosing its heroes. Sometimes it remembers a name. Sometimes it remembers a generation. Rosie was never famous because she was one woman. She became unforgettable because she stood for millions whose names never made the history books. So the next time you see that determined face beneath the words, "We can do it," remember, you aren't looking at one person. You're looking at teachers, mothers, students, secretaries, and neighbors who stepped forward in history's darkest hour and did extraordinary things. And sometimes the greatest legends aren't built around a single hero. They're built around the courage of an entire generation.
The vault closes, but history remains.